Hi, I'm Reverend Keith Kron, Director of the Office of Bisexual, Gay, Lesbian, and Transgender Concerns, and manage the Beyond Categorical Thinking program. I want to talk with you now about the biases we see within search committees. In particular, the first way we see is around the way they ask questions of candidates. Often what we've heard from candidates is that people get asked certain types of questions while other people don't. A couple of years ago, I was involved with a particular case where a minister who identified as gay told me he kept being told by his references that all they ever asked about was if he preached anything besides gay sermons. I did a little bit of research about this and discovered that none of the other pre-candidates, who were all heterosexual, were asked if they preached anything besides straight sermons. And one of the things that we know is that often people's identities affect the way they ask questions. I would encourage you to think about the way in which you ask questions, because the way you do will send information to the candidate. Now, based on what I had heard from this particular candidate, the candidate was a good match for the congregation, but he pulled out because he thought the search committee had too much bias that would make the ministry an unsuccessful match. So I would encourage you, as you're thinking about the way you ask questions, to think about asking them in this way. For example, as opposed to asking a minister, do you preach anything besides gay sermons? I would encourage you to ask every person who you might potentially want as your minister, do you have particular themes in your ministry that you return to in your preaching? What are the things that you say again and again and again in your sermons? Because all ministers have themes that they return to. Another way that we see this is asking a minister with a disability if they have the stamina to be able to do the job. You might ask all candidates how they're going to handle the different expectations that people have of them in regards to the ministry, and list all the different expectations that you have. And you could ask that for any candidate, not just ones with disabilities. You could also ask people how they're going to take care of themselves. Every minister needs to engage in self-care. What do they need to do in order to make sure that their ministry is successful? As opposed to asking, will you have enough stamina to do the job? The question is, how will you set limits? How will you take care of yourself as you engage in our ministry? Another question you might ask every candidate, as opposed to how does being an African American affect your ministry, ask every candidate how their identity affects their ministry. Let them know the demographics of your congregation and community. Chances are a minister who identifies as straight, white, and male, that it would be a good question to ask how their identity affects their ministry in your particular congregation, particularly if you're trying to do outreach to other groups in the community who might be people of color, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, whatever the particular group might be. So ask that question of everyone, as opposed to just asking, well, how does your being a person with a disability, how does your being a person who's Latina, how does your being bisexual affect your ministry? Ask every candidate how their identity affects who they are. Another bias we see in congregations is sort of a been there, done that mentality. What we see in congregations who have just had a settled minister who identified as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, a minister with a disability, or a minister who was a person of color, is that we don't need to do that again because we've just done that, often overlooking a person who might be the best match for them. Please make sure that you look at all potential candidates potentially as the best match for you, and remember that just because you have one gay man, the next gay man may not be the same. We actually saw that in a congregation where they ruled out anyone who was gay, thinking that all gay men were alike. They had two pre-candidates, one of whom was a person who identified as humanist in his theology, who was very self-revealing. They had another gay man in the search, in their pre-candidating, who was a UU Christian, who was very, very controlled in the way that he revealed information about himself, and in fact more politically conservative. But because the congregation thought they were both gay men, they thought they were alike. And when that one gay man pulled out, they decided to select the second gay man, and then discovered quickly how bad of a match that was. So please avoid making assumptions just because of identity. Another thing that we see in search committees is people saying, well, identity doesn't matter. We also see the reverse in saying identity does matter. The reality is identity does matter to some degree, but sometimes it doesn't matter. For example, we had a minister show up one Sunday morning to preach, and a congregant said, "Oh, you're wearing that shirt because purple is the color of gay and lesbian people." And the minister replied, "No, I'm wearing that shirt because it was the one clean one I found hanging on my closet and I hadn't done laundry this week." People often make assumptions about identity that may or may not be true. And people then also want to engage in sort of this idea of colorblind. Well, they won't talk about issues of race or ethnicity because they're a person of color, because we're all human. When in fact, if you are a person of color, being a person of color affects who you are. It affects your ministry. We want people who are whole people to be ministry, to be able to talk about all parts of their lives, and not just be able to talk about some of them. Another way that we've seen search committees limit their choices is when they get to the point of selecting 3 pre-candidates, is they decide we can't have any more than one gay person. We can't have any more than one person of color. We can't have any more than one person of disability. But they almost never say we can't have more than one straight person. Your goal is to find the best match as you go in your congregational search. That person might be someone who's gay, lesbian. It might be 3 people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender when you get to the pre-candidating process. It might be none of them. But please make sure that what you're looking for are the skills and qualities you want in your minister, and not just looking at things about their identity as a way to either winnow out or to include someone who you're looking for. We had a congregation in particular saying, we need a minister who will attract young families. And in their minds, the only person who would do that would be a young, straight, white, married, able-bodied minister. They didn't realize that a minister with any identity might in fact be the exact right person they could look for, and that a young, straight, white, married, able-bodied minister might be the in fact wrong person for them to call as they were trying to do outreach to families. So be aware of the biases that you might have and focus again on the skills and qualities. Best of luck to you as you do your search. I hope you find the best match. Thank you for all of your work.